Hey everybody, I'm Aaron Simmons. This is Philosophy for Where We Find Ourselves, November 14th, 2023. So we are currently continuing in our series on continental philosophy of religion. Last week I did some work trying to lay out some broad strokes differences between continental approaches and analytic approaches to philosophy of religion. And importantly, the takeaway from last week is that their differences are really matters of style, not radically matters of content. And secondly, they draw on different kinds of historical archives as resources or vocabularies doing the work that they do. Today, what I want to do is dig a little bit more into those archives that speak to continental philosophers of religion in really profound, and I would suggest kind of foundation-laying ways. And I want to do this by talking about two thinkers and two ideas developed by those thinkers that I consider to be among, certainly not the only, but among the foundational gestures in continental philosophy of religion, where even if people disagree with these ideas, they work through them. They have to navigate them in order to make sense of where they stand in the current debates. Those two ideas are, first, Nietzsche's notion that God is dead, and secondly, Jacques Derrida's conception of religion without religion. Let's dive in. When Nietzsche says that God is dead, it's important that we understand this is not an atheistic thesis. Now, it can be read that way. But a better way to make sense of it is that the death of God is a poetic way of insisting on, of highlighting, of stressing, of emphasizing the radicality of human hermeneutic embeddedness. Now, I get that sounds way too highfalutin for the kind of level at which we normally do philosophy here on the channel. So let me try to put it in a little bit better, a little bit more accessible mode. When Nietzsche says that God is dead, what he really means is we are always and inescapably responsible for deciding how to interpret the real that we encounter. We actually have to decide what world will be real. Another way to put this is the death of God names the birth of our responsibility. Now, you might say, well, how does that work? In Nietzsche's case, it's basically this idea. Without God as the name for some sort of objective standard and external authority by which we make sense of who we are, where we are, what the world means, and also where we ought to be going, our sense of morality or direction. Without God naming that external authority, that objective standard, we are left trying to figure out, well, who will we then make ourselves? What is it that is possible given what we confront in our experience? And so what Nietzsche is trying to do is emphasize the radical perspectival location from which any claims of knowledge are offered, right? I don't get to say, I know that X or I know that P from just anywhere, what we would traditionally term a God's eye view, but instead I only get to claim that I know that P from where I find myself. This should not worry us, though. It doesn't lead to a kind of radical or naive relativism. It instead stresses the universality of embodied knowledge for beings like us. The best we can do with what we confront is to make sense of it given what we have confronted in the past. So perspectivalism, embodiment, and context. We only know within spaces where we already have said that certain things are meaningful. Only given what's already occurred, what we've made sense of, what we've already interpreted, do we have the tool set for interpreting what comes. So God is dead, not an atheistic claim, but it is a claim that forces us to take seriously the hermeneutic, interpretive, embodied, perspectival, and contextual work that we have to do with any claims about things like meaning, purpose, truth, goodness, beauty. In other words, when God is dead, the real work of figuring out what God will mean begins. And I think that this is actually really profound and really helpful. Some thinkers, like Merold Westphal, have suggested that it's only in light of the death of God that the right kind of work can occur for religious people. So if God's not dead, in this, again, metaphorical poetic sense, there's no way for us to be able to do the hard work of figuring out what it means to be religious, what religion means, what God will name, what it means to live in light of a commitment or a relationship to God, depending on how we make sense of that term, that idea. So in light of this hermeneutic gesture by Nietzsche, we then find in Jacques Derrida this idea of religion without religion. Sometimes this X without X structure can be deployed in ways that are far more confusing than necessary. When Derrida talks about religion without religion, what I read him as doing is inviting us to understand the important structural ways in which terms and concepts like religion do work for us in our semantic context, in our world that we inhabit. So when we say, "Are you religious?" I hear Derrida coming back to say, well, what work is that question doing in the social space where it is meaningful? And when we think about religion without religion, we get to bracket the truth claims of something like Christian theism and instead say, what is the context whereby those truth claims can even be considered? So he wants to affirm, even as he says, rightly passing as an atheist, he wants to affirm the importance of the structures, the relational contexts that religion names for us as related to the future, living in anticipation and expectation, understanding the radicality of how justice is a kind of ideal towards which we strive and in relation to which we challenge and critique our way of being in the world. All of these ideas for Derrida are deeply religious. But they're not religious because you now have to affirm some faith statement or sign the bottom line of a doctrinal claim. They are religious because they do the kind of work that religion as a category and concept has traditionally done. So when we split the, you might say, truth content of religion from the structure, the semantic meaningfulness of the concept, it's not, again, a rejection of that truth content. It's entirely possible for Nietzsche and for Derrida that something like theism be true. Now, they personally reject the truth of theism, but that doesn't mean that they're, as philosophers, putting it out of bounds. Instead, what they're inviting us to do is do the important hermeneutic philosophical work that opens the space where we then can consider something like the truth claims on offer. Because now we can understand the stakes of those claims, why they're not simply matters of truth tables and S knows that P abstraction. They are fundamental matters of who we are, how we navigate the world as meaningful, and what it is that we name as the hope towards which we strive as embodied social beings. Now, again, I know for some people, this will sound, well, that's not philosophy of religion. Maybe. But in continental approaches, it's only because we take hermeneutics seriously, we take the embodiment of our perspectival knowing seriously, and we take the semantic operations of things like our concepts, terms, and categories seriously, that we can do work like, well, now what do we mean by God? Is, in fact, some being the case as accurately named God? Is faith actually a fundamentally religious idea, or is it an existential concept that can sometimes be deployed in the direction of something called religion? Those questions emerge on the back of these fundamental Nietzschean and Derridian gestures that invite us to be, I think, more careful and more aware about the work we do as philosophers of religion. I hope this is helpful. We'll continue next week and deepen our engagement with continental philosophy of religion. I do hope you're finding this compelling. If you've got questions, objections, suggestions for specific issues in continental philosophy of religion that you'd like me to take up, please drop them in the comments. And additionally, please let me appreciate all of you who have liked my videos, who have subscribed to the channel. And if you haven't yet, please do. It really does help me be able to continue to do this sort of work. And while you're at it, drop over to my website, jrnsimmons.com, get subscribed to my monthly newsletter. And also, while you're at it, hop over to your local bookshop or to Amazon and buy a copy of my new book, Camping with Kierkegaard. I would greatly appreciate it. Reach out to me. Let me know how I can help you. I'll see you next time, unless a piano falls on our heads.